Hello students, please take a few minutes to check your answers to your homework. Today we are going to be looking at being able to solve a rational equation. So if we look at this, a rational expression is something that, if you look at the example there in yellow, like 1 over n minus 3 plus 1 over n minus 4. And then you can see that the rational equation is, when we look at that has a equal to sign and then an expression after the equal to sign. So when we look at being able to solve a rational equation, the first thing we have to do is restrict our denominator, restrict our domain by looking here at where the variable is, and we know that we can't have division by a 0, so in this particular problem we know x cannot equal 0. And so after we do that, we begin to solve. We're then going to look at this and look for the lowest common denominator. So we have an x, a 3, and a 6. So our lowest common denominator here is going to be 6x. I'm then going to take that lowest common denominator and I'm going to multiply each part of the equation by it. So here's my 6x, my lowest common denominator, and I'm going to multiply that by 1 over x plus 6x, my lowest common denominator, times 1 over 3 equals, multiplying the lowest common denominator, 6x times 5 over 6. So we've taken this whole equation and multiplied it by 6x, our lowest common denominator. And now I'm going to take and do each part. So my x's will cancel here and leave me with 6. 6 divided by 3 is 2. That part will leave me with a 2x. 6 divided by 6 will cancel. This is going to leave me with a 5x. And then I'm going to take and just solve this equation. And find out that x is equal to 2. All right, looking at our next equation and determining what our x values cannot be equal to, we see here we have an x plus 2. So we're going to say that we know that x cannot equal negative 2. And we have an x minus 2. And so that is going to tell us that our variable cannot be equal to positive 2. That'll create a 0. We would also have to look at this one here, but if we factor x squared minus 4, we know that that's going to be x plus 2 and x minus 2, which then is going to give us the same two restrictions here. So the next thing we need to do is determine our lowest common denominator. And so when we look at this, our lowest common denominator would need to include the x plus 2 and the x minus 2. And then x minus 2 is already in there and x plus 2 is already in there. So this is our lowest common denominator. And now we're going to take our lowest common denominator and we're going to multiply it by each part of the equation. So I'm going to have x plus 2 times x minus 2, and that is going to be multiplied by this first part here, 2 over x plus 2. And then I'm going to take and multiply my lowest common denominator times this second term here, which is 4 over x minus 2. And then I'm going to multiply my lowest common denominator times my last part of the equation, which is x minus 1 in the numerator, and then x plus 2, x minus 2 in the denominator. Now I'm going to see what can cancel out. Back over at my first term, this will cancel out, the x plus 2, and then I'm going to have 2 times x minus 2, and I'm going to distribute that. I'm then going to have the x minus 2's cancel out, and that will leave me with 4 times x plus 2, and I'm going to distribute that. And then both the x plus 2 and the x minus 2 will cancel out, and that will leave me with x minus 1. And then I'm going to combine like terms and solve this equation for x. And -1 is our answer. Alright, so what I'd like for you to do is copy down this problem and solve it on your own, and then when you have it completed, go ahead and start the video again and check your answer. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do with this is look to see what our y value cannot be equal to. And so since I see a y plus 3 here, I'm going to say that y cannot equal -3. And since I have a y minus 3, y cannot equal positive 3. I'm then going to look at my lowest common denominator. And looking at my lowest common denominator, I'm going to have a y plus 3. I'm also going to have a y minus 3. And I see that this y squared y is y plus 3 times y minus 3. And so now I'm going to multiply each part of the equation by that lowest common denominator. So starting here, I'm going to have y plus 3 times y minus 3, and that is going to be multiplied by 5 over y plus 3. And then I'm going to have the second part here, the second expression, y plus 3, y minus 3, my lowest common denominator, and I'm going to multiply that by 2 over y minus 3. And then I'm going to have y plus 3 over y minus 3, and that is going to be multiplied by, a little bit more room there, that is going to be multiplied by 5 over x plus 3, x minus 3. And so now I'm going to look to see what I can cancel. I can cancel the y plus 3's. That's going to leave me with 5 times y minus 3, which is 5y minus 15. I'm then going to take and cancel the y minus 3's, and I am going to multiply the 2 times the y plus 3, which is going to be 2y plus 6. And then over here, those y plus 3's and y minus 3 are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with 5. Combining like terms, I'm going to have 7y minus 9. And then I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And y will equal 2. Alright, so now we should be getting pretty good at saying what our restriction is going to be. So we're going to look here and say that this is going to be y cannot equal -6. And if we look at this, we know this is a y plus 6, y minus 6. So also y cannot equal 6. And then we're going to start to look for our lowest common denominator, which must include a y plus 6 as well as a y minus 6. keeping in mind that this has a denominator of 1. And now we're going to multiply our LCD by every part of the equation. And so I'm going to multiply y plus 6 times y minus 6 over times this first expression, which is y over y plus 6. Then I'm going to multiply my LCD times this part of the expression here, which is 72 over x plus 6, x minus 6. And then moving on, I'm going to multiply this y plus 6 times y minus 6. That is my LCD. But I know that really that is y squared minus 36 when I multiply that out. And so since this denominator of the 4 here doesn't have either part of that, I'm going to be multiplying that by 4. You can leave this as y plus 6, y minus 6, but you're going to end up having to multiply it out anyway. And now I'm going to have to take and cancel. And I'm going to see that I'm going to distribute this y times y minus 6. Here, I'm actually going to have a lot cancel and just be left with 72. Here I'm going to distribute this 4, and this is going to be 4y squared minus 144. Okay, now I want to keep my y squared, so I'm going to move this y squared over to the other side, and that is going to create a 3y squared. I am then going to move this 6y over, and since there's no y term on the other side, it's just going to be a positive 6y. I'm then going to combine this 72 and negative 144 to get a negative 72. And so what I have left is a quadratic, and so I'm going to see how can this factor. And so I can see that I can take out a 3, and so when I take out a 3, I'm now going to take and factor this into y minus 6 and, excuse me, my fault, y plus 6 and y minus 4, and that would give me a negative 6 and a positive 4. And I know that I cannot have a negative 6, so my answer is only going to be y equals 4. Okay, looking at this last problem, before we begin, we are going to have to factor the denominators here. So this is going to be 2 times x minus 1. This is going to be 3 times x plus 1. And this is going to be 12 times an x squared minus 1, which we know then that x squared minus 1 can become x plus 1, x minus 1. So I can see by looking at those factors that I will not be allowed to have x equal negative 1 or x equal positive 1. And then as I go to determine what is my lowest common denominator, I can see that I am going to need between a 2, 3, and a 12. I'm going to need to have a 12. I'm going to need to have a x minus 1 and an x plus 1. And so now I'm going to begin multiplying each part here by that lowest common denominator. So I'm going to take 12 times x minus 1 times x plus 1, and I'm going to multiply it by x over 2 times x minus 1. And then I'm going to take and multiply this second part of the fraction here times the lowest common denominator, 12 times x plus 1 times x minus 1. And then we're going to have to multiply the last part of the equation by both the numerator, or excuse me, by the lowest common denominator. And we can actually see that the 12 will cancel, the x plus 1 will cancel, and the x minus 1 will cancel. So really what we'll have over here remaining is the numerator. We're going to see a lot of things cancel out now. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. The x minus 1 is going to cancel out. And I'm going to have 6 times x. And that is going to be distributed into x plus 1. And so that is going to be 6x squared plus 6x. I'm then going to have 12 divided by 3 will be 4. And then I'm going to have the x plus 1 cancel out. And I'm going to multiply negative 2 times 4. That's going to be negative 8 that I'm going to distribute into the x minus 1. And now at this point, I'm going to get this set equal to 0, keeping my x squared term positive. And so that is going to give me a x squared. And then we're going to end up with a negative 2x when we combine like terms there. And the negative 2x on both sides cancel out. When I bring this negative 9 over, that's going to give me x squared minus 1 equals 0, which is going to factor to x plus 1 and x minus 1, giving me answers of negative 1 and positive 1. But we have already said that those produce zeros in the denominator, and therefore this problem has no solution.